All the witnesses will now begin the question and answer portion of the hearing, and I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Koblitz, if the NIH is not capable of enforcing or isn't inclined to enforce safety standards at labs doing risky research, who would you recommend take on that responsibility?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what we need in this country is an overhaul of the biosafety, biosecurity, and duties research oversight system, which would be best placed in an independent agency that would be able to conduct that oversight, as well as conduct the kind of research that both Dr. Casagrande and Dr. Hawley talked about being needed. This would be an organization similar to Nuclear Regulatory Commission or the FAA or the National Transportation Safety Board. That would be an independent technical agency that would have responsibility for those activities.
Several of you indicated that there were organizations that weren't connected with the NIH or even the U.S. federal government that were doing this type of research or might be doing this type of research. Would it be possible that we set something up that would be not necessarily governmental or quasi-governmental that would be funded by those private organizations that are doing this type of research? Back to you.
That's certainly a possibility. I mean, most of the research is probably being conducted with public funding, but again, as Dr. Casagrande mentioned, there are gaps in the oversight system that would allow a private facility to engage in this research without any kind of oversight whatsoever. And so you'd want to have a comprehensive oversight that would include facilities regardless of whether they're publicly funded or privately funded.
I appreciate that. We have incomplete data that suggests, and some of you all have suggested, that there are accidents in the biosafety labs, that it's not necessarily such a rarity, but how do we start to get a more complete count of the number of accidents and incidents at high containment labs? Dr. Casagrande, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A good accounting of not just incidents that have occurred, but also the near misses would help us to learn from the incidents that inevitably will occur and prevent their repetition, and also start studying their root causes and most effective ways to mitigate them.
And you think we need federal legislation that indicates, I think both you and Dr. Koblitz indicated, we need federal legislation that would require the labs, whether they be government or private, to report these near misses or accidents?
A database that's missing a big portion of the data, that would be what's drawn from the private sector, would be less robust than one that contains all the data, obviously. And some of the research environment in the private sector is different from the academic sector. For instance, their personnel is much more stable. They don't have as much turnover as you do in academia, so they're probably going to suffer different risks. So cutting them out would not be adequate.
All right, I appreciate that. Mr. Pecos. Can you explain the necessity of progress reports when conducting research in biosafety laboratories?
Absolutely. I think it demonstrates progress of research. It demonstrates areas of research and directions of research. Oftentimes, directions of research do change from the initial proposal that was submitted, and progress reports are a great way for regulatory agencies, funding agencies, to keep track of how those changes are going forward and whether there was a major change in direction of research.
And if we're missing progress reports, shouldn't we pause the study or the research until the progress reports can be completed and evaluated?
Yeah, progress reports are essential, I think, for monitoring research.
So when you don't have them, you should put a stop to it. All right, Dr. Hawley, I understand that you reviewed some of the biosafety sections of the recently released Senate report, and you were quoted in the Washington Post as saying that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had imprudent laboratory practices, and it was very, very apparent that the Wuhan Institute of Virology's personnel's biological safety training is minimal. Is that correct, and can you expand?
Yeah, that is my belief by reading some of the reports. Of course, I've never visited the facility, but based upon the reports I've read and the approaches they had to implementation or developing biological safety equipment led me to believe that their training was less than perfect.
And when you say that there was some equipment missing, you're talking about the air incinerator that was not installed until late 2019?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. That's a real concern, isn't it?
It is, because the air incinerator technology was replaced by the HEPA filter in the 1950s, early 1960s. We had an air incinerator from our aerobiology building at Fort Detrick, and that was eventually closed down, again, because of the advent of the HEPA filter. Not only that, because of the cost and maintenance involved.
So they weren't doing anything, as I understand it, and then they put the air incinerator in, which was 1950s or 1960s technology when there was better technology available. Isn't that what you're saying? And my
Yes,
time's-
sir. I believe that they implemented the air incineration because of their lack of reliable data regarding the killing of organisms in their primary procedure, such as using an autoclave.
Yeah, kind of like shutting
It
the
was-
barn door after the
It was a
horse is already out.
redundant move. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I yield back to, and now recognize the ranking member of the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Castor, for her 5 minutes of
Thank you,
questions.
Mr. Chairman.